YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, continuing on with the TA-08 Pro, trying not to get the arms or else in wrong place, but really enjoying the build so far. Trying to keep length of videos down to make them a bit more manageable, a bit more watchable, but let's get you back in for a close-up and we'll carry on from, I think we're at number 18 now, so we'll see how far we get this time. Right, so you're going to be building the turnbuckles up, and it's telling you to have the little nicks both pointing towards the right. The gap you're going to be looking at on these is 25.6mm. You need one of the little dots pointing up on the opposite ends, and then you want the little dot on the side pointing down on this one and down on that one. So then we're going to need the steering rack, or what looks to be the steering rack. So we're going to grab this. This will be part T12. Then you're going to want two of these little bearings. They're going to sit into it. Then once we've got them in, you're going to want two of the 3x8 tapered head screws. They're going to sit through the bearings. We're going to want one of our ball joint parts, and we're going to be screwing this into the top, and just be careful not to over tighten these. Then from the front we're going to want two of these. And I must admit, so far everything seems to be going together really nice, apart from the slight confusion on which way round the arms go. So once we've got them all in place, you then want two of the A5 parts, and then let's have a look what size hex we need. So you're going to want your 2mm hex, and then we're going to screw these in. And again, don't go crazy tight on these. We're not trying to crush them or anything. So you just want to gently screw them down, and if you try it and they're a little bit stiff, just back it off ever so slightly and you'll feel them loosen up. So you want them tight enough to not have any play, but you want them loose enough to be nice and free. So once we've got that all assembled, we can move on to our next part. So for this, we want to position these arms with the little dots towards the back and the little notches both to the same side. Then we've got this little piece that we're going to build up, and we're going to leave a 6mm gap between it. And basically, if you get this with the little dot and the dot's facing you, the other dot wants to be on the opposite side. So one dot to this side, one facing straight down, and the notch to the right. So when we fit this, we're going to be fitting it with the dot facing straight down. So then we should have the other dot facing away. Then we want these with the little dot facing in towards the steering assembly. So we should have the dots on the outside facing up and the little notches both facing that way. So let's see what else we've got. Alright, so we're going to want two of the MB8 bearings, and we're going to sit them down on top of the steering posts. Then we're going to want to get a steering assembly, thread it through the middle at belt. And we're going to sit that down on this bearing. Then we're going to drop another bearing onto the top on each side. Then you're going to want the MB2 screws. These should screw straight down into a chassis post. And we should have some really free moving steering. Then it's turners. We want one of the small MA4 screws and the little antenna tube, the K2. Now I'm not entirely sure whether I'm going to need this, but I'm going to put it on here just so it stays with kit and don't get lost. Really does depend which receiver I decide to use on this one. And again on this, it asks you to use a tiny bit of grease on the screw. Not really sure why. It's the first time I've come up against this where it's asking you to put little bit of grease on some of the screws. But I've just moved that so the opening faces straight back. So if we do have an antenna wire, it's not rubbing on belt. You could even face it away to keep it more out of road. But that is up to part 20, and we're all built with really nice, easy to move steering. So let's see what else we need. Right, so moving along, we're going to be building the axles up, drive shafts if you like. And on these I like to use a bit of the graphite grease. I just find it stops wear. So we're going to want the little barrel in first. Then we're going to want to place this inside. Then you're going to want to get the pin through. Now this can be a bit tricky, and you've just got to make sure the pin goes through the barrel and not down the side, which it can easily do. But you can tell when it's in properly because there's no play. Then we're going to get the little clip, and you're going to put this in the hole that hasn't got the pin. So I'll see if I can get this on camera, but it's usually a bit tricky. So look for your one with the pin in, and you want to get this through basically where the pin isn't. So if you get that into one of the holes and then just work it around, and then once you've got it on, you can kind of push it back and get it over the end into the little rail. If you just carefully work it round, it'll drop in, and then you got one axle built up, and usually absolutely covered in graphite grease at this point. So moving along, we have this tiny little shim that it tells us to put in if we are using aluminium hexes, but I'm going to pop it on anyway, even if I end up using the plastic ones building the kit, because I will be swapping them for aluminium. So once we've got that little shim, you then want a bearing. We then want the little spacer. It's then going to go into the hub. We then want to close it up with another bearing. Then you're going to want to get, so it's part C2 and part C4 we're building this way around. Then we're going to get a little screw. This one will be the MB1 3x8. So you're going to want to drop that in. Then again, it's going to ask us to put a tiny bit of grease on this. We want one of the 1mm shims, and then we're going to screw this in from the bottom. And it is asking us to put a little dab of oil on this, or grease on the actual threads before we screw it in. And it is a bit strange how it shows you to build this in the manual, because it shows you to build it that way, then when you're putting this bit on, it shows it that way. Not sure which way around it's going to go on car yet, but that's what it tells us to do. Then we have to do exactly the same in the opposite direction, and this time you're going to use parts C1 and C3. So I'll get this one assembled and then we can carry on. Right, so we're now going to want to get us drive shafts in. So we want as kingpins. So I think it's going to be easier to drop these into the bottom first. Let's try and get 2 of these in. Then we're going to want one of his drive shafts. And again, just going to stick a bit of graphite grease on the end of this to stop it wearing. So we're going to get that into position. Then you want the longer 14mm one on the top. So I'm now going to try and get a top kingpin in. It's going to be a bit fiddly getting this on camera, but basically you've got the little A14 parts and they've got a recess that needs to point towards the kingpin. So as top ones are going to face down. Also on the top one we have a spacer, 1mm spacer. So if I can carefully get that into position and get it started, then I'll flip the entire thing over and try and not let us kingpin fall out. Then again we want the A14 part, but we want the tiny recess pointing down, and it does help it sit into place. And this is going to be one of the 12mm screws. See if we can get this lined up. And it does tell you not to over tighten these, so again we're just going to carefully nip it down till it takes the play out of it, but you want it nice and free. Then we just want to nip this one down and keep trying it so you know you're not over tightening it. So you just want no play, but you don't want it restricting the movement. Then we're going to have to fit the opposite side. Good thing is with this graphite grease, it kind of works its way around everywhere, including your fingers, table, anything else it gets near. So again, let's try and get the top one in. Then we're going to want the A14 part face down. then as 1mm shim. And hope it all don't fall apart as you try and tighten it up. And we can flip it. And again, we want this little A14 part with the recess face down. And it does seem to make quite a nice steering assembly, this. Seems to be very little play. And it's not binding up at all. And I'm not too covered in graphite grease, which makes a change. So once you get all that into position, last thing to do is make sure your little dots are facing up. And we should be able to clip these on. And we should have some really smooth steering. And I must admit that is really impressive. Probably some of the most impressive steering I've seen on a Tamiya car, or Tamiya. But yeah, that's what you should end up with. You should have the 1mm spacers at the top and your drive shafts all fully assembled. And should be able to rotate nice and freely, and the steering should feel really smooth, but no play whatsoever. Really impressed with that. So let's carry on. Right, so building the rear drive shafts up is going to be exactly the same as the front, just we're using the blue aluminium shafts on the rear. So that's the order you're going to do them in, and you've seen me build one up front, so there's not much point showing you how to do exactly the same thing again. So I'll get these two built up and then we'll carry on. Right, so once finished, that's what we should end up with. Two drive shafts assembled and as hubs. It's just exactly the same as the front ones, but these are blue. So let's carry on. So just the same as the front, we're going to go for as little kingpin inserts in the bottom. Then I'm going to try and position the drive shaft. See if I can get that somewhere near. Then we're going to want the longer of the two screws. We're going to want as little insert in the top. So once we've got that in, you're going to want your little plastic spacer on with the insert facing down. Then get a screw through. Then we're going to want a shim. Try and get it all lined up best you can. And at this point I am so glad that they decided to use hex drive, because this with a screw is a pain in the backside. So you want your shorter, I believe these are the 12mm screws on the bottom, and then you want your little spacer with the insert facing down so it locks into place. And we'll get this screwed down. And again, don't go crazy tight with these, you just want to remove the play. It would be quite easy to over tighten these. So once we've got one in, we can move across to the opposite side, and we just want a spacer in bottom. Get us drive shaft somewhere close. Then we want as little spacer with the recess facing down. Longer of the two screws as 1mm shim. Get it started, and then you can hold it together and flip it over. Then as final spacer with recess facing down. And the shorter of the two screws. We should be able to get it lined up. And we can finish off tightening it down. So once we've got them all into place, you should have your little dots facing upwards. And we should be able to snap these on. And there we have his rear arms fully assembled. So it's actually starting to look like an RC now. There we have it. We have steering and front and rear suspension. So I think I'm going to call it a day at that one, and should be a nice little video to follow. So let's wrap this one up. So there we have it. I believe that was part 18 to 23. So we've now got something that vaguely resembles a touring car style RC, and we have fully operational steering, and all his arms are fitted, his drive shafts are fitted. Everything runs really smooth. But really enjoying this build. Hope you're enjoying watching along, and don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family, and hopefully catch you guys again in the next one.